Hi everyone, welcome. Today we'll be continuing our series on the South African Union coins, specifically on the value and auctions of some of these coins. Today is the turn of the Union Shilling. The South African 1 shilling was minted from 1923 until 1960, and it was the third largest silver coin. Equivalent to 12 pennies, the shilling was quite valuable at the time, buying a loaf of bread, milk and even some extras. A train or tram fare into the city cost around a shilling, or you could buy a magazine and maybe a newspaper or two. From 1923 to 1950, the coin was made from 80% silver, an equivalent of 4.54 grams. From 1951 to 1960, the ratio was changed to 50% silver and 50% copper, or 2.83 grams. Shillings prior to 1951 have an intrinsic value of at least 64 rands, and around 40 rand from 1951 onwards. This is all based on today's silver price of 14 rand to the gram. The shilling is just shy of 5.7 grams in weight, with a diameter of 23.7 millimeters. And as a comparison, the modern 2 rand coin is slightly smaller at 23 millimeters. The coin has an interesting design. Depending on the year, the obverse features either King George V, King George VI, or Queen Elizabeth II. The reverse features the Lady of Good Hope, with her right arm resting on an anchor, looking over a calm sea, almost in contrast to the stormy union of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans at Cape Agulhas. This is the same Lady of Hope that was often depicted on the Cape Colony stamps during the 1800s. The anchor's symbolism for the Cape comes from the Renaissance and post-Renaissance fondness for the 3 Christian virtues, as listed by Paul in his letter to the Church of Corinth. This is 1 Corinthians 13 verse 13. Faith, hope and love, or charity. The virtues were symbolized by 3 virgins, each holding a symbol of her appropriate virtue. Hope was shown holding an anchor, and was considered the appropriate symbol for the Cape of Good Hope. Here, the statue of the Lady of Hope can be seen at the Castle of Good Hope during a commemoration service and wreath-laying ceremony to honor the 1st Battalion of the Cape Corps that fought valiantly at the Battle of Square Hill in Palestine on 19 September 1918. The design on the reverse has remained fairly consistent, with only subtle changes such as the 2 1923 varieties, one with dots around the sun and the other without. In 1926, the one before the shilling was removed so that the denomination only reads shilling. And then in 1931, the Z in Zoit was changed to an S, reflecting the spelling of Soit in the infant language Afrikaans, which has only been recognized as an official language 6 years earlier in 1925. And then finally, in 1951, the word shilling was replaced with one S. Let's look at some notable auctions and some key dates and values of the South African Union Shilling. But before we do, I found this video particularly difficult to make, especially the estimation on coin values. Quality of Union coins are critical in determining value, and in most cases my estimates are somewhat on the conservative side when compared with mainstream catalogues. And this is especially true for raw coins due to the risk involved. And I'm bound to be wrong on many of them, but hopefully by not too much. And with that out of the way, let's get started. The shillings from 1923 to 1936 features a detailed bust of King George V on the obverse, facing left. The legend reads Georgius V Rex Imperator, which is Latin for George, 5th King Emperor. In case you are wondering about the V, classic Latin only has 23 letters. The letter V is an allograph, representing both the sound V and U. What's an allograph, you might ask? Well, an allograph is a variation of a letter in another context. So, for example, uppercase and lowercase letters are allographs. So the V in Georgius is actually a U. Now, since silver is a relatively soft metal compared to nickel, for example, uncirculated and even about uncirculated examples from the King George V era are rare and highly collectible. However, Well-worn coins, to say very fine and below, are relatively easy to obtain and often quite cheaply. And of course, this excludes the 1931, we'll get to that coin, and to some extent the 1926, 27 and 28 shillings. Be very careful to purchase raw coins, especially in the King George V era. The gains can be high, but so is the risk. The 1926 proof shilling is listed for 500,000 Rand in some catalogues, and I think this is very speculative. I'll make a separate video on the 1926 proof set, but suffice it to say, it is practically unobtainable, specifically as a single coin, the shilling as a single coin. Proof shillings of other years, except the 1923, sells for between 15,000 to 30,000 Rand, dependent on quality, and the more common 1923 proof shilling sells for around 3,000 Rand. This 1923 MS65 shilling looks like it left the mint on Tuesday. There's very little toning on the coin, and it must have been kept really well by the original owner. It sold on 17 September 2015 for $2,585. Just a few days later, this MS63 sold for $564 or 7,772 Rand and 20 cents. That's of course at the historic exchange rate. And then this 1923 MS62 was auctioned off on Bob Shop on 24 March 2019 for 1,908 Rand. Isn't it amazing the difference grading points can have? If there's anything that I've learned about numismatics, it's the 3 Qs: quality, quality, and quality. This MS64 1924 shilling sold in 2008 for only $546, which was 4,340 Rand at the time. And likewise, this MS64 sold a year later for $632.50. That's just over 5,000 Rand. I cannot provide an explanation for the low prices here, beside the fact that this was almost 15 years ago. In stark contrast to these two coins, this MS65 sold for $4,230 in 2016. That's over 66,000 Rand. Granted, this is a spectacular coin, and it almost seems like it's having its own private sunrise in the legend. On Bob Shop, this 1924 sold for 21,520 Rand after some rather fierce bidding. I suspect that this coin might be the same Remick that sold in 2008 for $546 that I've just shown you. I also could not verify the coin in the old slab at NGC, implying that the coin is possibly a reslab. This often happens if the slab gets damaged or scratched. This 1944 farthing of mine is one such example. As this is the finest known coin, I'm also considering sending it in for a reslab as well. And then finally, as with all coins, quality is everything. As this VF30 shilling can testify, it sold in 2010 for a measly $40 or 289 Rand, barely covering the grading costs. The 1926 shilling is truly a key date. I could not find an MS graded 1926 shilling, which is not surprising as NGC lists only 5 in MS, MS63 being the highest. This AU58 sold in 2015 for $4,935. That's over 56,000 Rand. If you have an uncirculated 1926 shilling and it grades MS64 or higher, I suspect that it could easily fetch 150,000 Rand on auction, if not higher. If you think that this 1927 shilling must be one of a kind, you're almost right. It's the finest known at PCGS, with only one other MS65 at NGC. It sold for $4,080 in 2015. It's worth far more today. This shilling sold a year later for $4,230. The coin is an MS64, one of only 4 coins and only one better. On Bob Shop, This MA62 sold for 21,000 Rand in 2022. They don't come up often. A high-grade 1928 shilling will sell for several thousand. I could only find this AU58 that sold in 2014 for $528.75. Looking at the obverse, you can make out only the slightest of wear. This once lovely MA65 1929 shilling sold in 2013 for $1,762.50. That's just over 17,000 Rand. The dark spot visible to the left of the obverse is erroneously called a carbon spot, since it's actually caused by sulfur. I suspect the spot appeared post-grading, as coins with such spots are often not graded this high. And sadly, it is nearly impossible to remove these without damaging the coin itself. This AU58, also quite a pretty coin, sold in 2014 for $270.25. That's just a few rand shy of 3,000 Rand. This beautifully honey-toned MA65 1930 shilling, graded by PCGS, sold for $1,920 in 2018. That's 23,568 Rand at the time. This AU58 retained much of its luster with only slight wear on the high points, and it sold in 2014 for $305.50. That's just over 3,000 Rand. The 1931 is another key date. Not a single 1931 MS graded coin exists either at NGC or PCGS. If one should ever emerge, I suspect that it would reach well over 200,000. Not only would it be the finest known coin, but it would be the only known MS coin to exist. Even raw coins sell at a decent premium. This very fine example reached 2,250 Rand in 2019. With these two examples, both about good and good, I would say, that sold for 995 Rand and 1,131 Rand respectively. Keep an eye out for a 1931. Since 6,603 were minted, there's bound to be more, and there might just be an Unk one hiding in an old barn in a rotting drawer. You never know. The 1932, 1935 and the 1936 are the easiest coins in the King George V series to obtain, both in terms of cost and availability. Although, as you will soon see, high-grade coins still demand quite a premium. This MA65 that sold for 4,600 Rand in 2020 is such an example. 2 years earlier, a coin with the same grade sold for $243 or 2,982 Rand at heritage auctions. And then this stunning MA66, which is the finest known, a spot it shares with only two other coins, sold for $2,820. That's over 31,000, almost 32,000 Rand back in 2014. That's a bit steep in my opinion, but then again, the heart wants what the heart wants. This uniquely toned 1933 shilling, graded MA65 by NGC, sold for $1,840 in 2008, and I suspect that it would be worth quite a bit more today. Then this 1934 MA62 shilling sold for the bargain price of $129.25 or 2,094 Rand in 2016. This lovely 1935 MA65 sold for $504 in 2021. The honey toning around the legends makes this coin extra special. This MA63 sold in 2015 for $223.25, which is just over 3,000 Rand, while this MA64 reached a price of $440 3 years earlier. That's just over 3,500 Rand at the time. You'll find King George VI's bust on the obverse of the shilling from 1937 to 1952, facing left. British monarchs alternate on coins in the direction they face, and as King George VI's brother, King Edward VIII, should have faced right, George VI faced left. Interestingly, early coin designs shows Edward VIII facing left, as he demanded it. However, as Edward VIII abdicated as king in December 1936, these coins, with him facing left, never circulated. As his successor, King George VI, is shown facing left, I can't wonder if this wasn't the Mint's way of telling King Edward, well, no, tradition is more important. Two versions of the legend exists. One that reads Georgius VI Rex Imperator or George VI King Emperor until 1947. In 1948, this was changed to Georgius Sextus Rex or George VI King, as more territories started to gain their independence. The survival rate of King George VI shillings is much higher than that of the King George V shillings, and as a result, obtaining high-quality coins are much easier. This excludes the shillings from 1944 to 1948, which had very low mintages. They are rare and can get insanely expensive. And let's have a look. Have you ever seen a shilling with red toning? Well, now you have. This beauty sold for $156 in 2011. That's just over 2,300 Rand. It graded MS65 at PCGS. This 1938 sold in 2012 for $188 or 1,529 Rand. It was graded MS63 by NGC. I paid 2,500 Rand for mine a year later. Ouch. In 1939, only 30 proof coins were produced. I've never seen one offered on its own. A complete short proof set sold in 2012 for $51,750. That's just over 450,000 Rand. 1940 is again an easy date. This MS62 sold in 2014 for $55, while an XF or extra fine sold in 2010 for $17. If you look at the high points, the wear is certainly clear. It's not worth sending in coins such as these. They belong in an album, in my opinion. This MS62 1941 shilling is from my personal collection. I bought it in 2019 for 453 Rand. That amount barely covers the grading costs. Here is my numismatic kryptonite. I cannot leave coins such as these alone. This is a spectacular coin, graded MS65 that sold in 2015 for $235 or 2,815 Rand. For a coin like that, I'd pay double that. Easy. Believe it or not, it's not a glitch in the matrix, but the same coin came up again a year later, and this time it sold for $211 or 3,315 Rand. A loss in dollar terms, but a gain in Rand terms. So in case you are wondering, yes, numismatics is a good Rand hedge. And yes, I'd still pay double. I cannot let a naturally toned coin be. And this one is really, really beautiful. From 1944 to 1948, very few shillings were actually minted, and these coins are scarce. Locally, this AU50 1944 shilling sold for 2,696 Rand in 2018, after some fierce bidding. Somewhat undervalued, I think. This MS63 1945 shilling, originally part of the Robert Bakewell collection, sold in 2020 for 8,051 Rand. A beautiful coin. And then this really nicely toned 1948 shilling sold graded as an MS65 in 2013 for $705 or just over 7,000 Rand. A very good price indeed. In 1949, only proofs were minted, 800 of them, so the coin is fairly obtainable. This 1950 shilling graded MS62 sold in 2014 for $52, just over 550 Rand. Again, a coin from my personal collection. This beautiful MS65 shilling is the second finest known coin, and I bought it in 2015 for for 1,500 Rand. From 1953 onwards, Queen Elizabeth II graced the obverse of the Union Shilling. Unfortunately, the coins of this era have a very low relief with little detail. This shortcoming was corrected for the UK coinage, but not for South Africa. The stark contrast between King George V and Queen Elizabeth II is quite clear. The coins are readily available, even in high quality, uncirculated condition. If a coin shows anywhere, its value drops quite sharply, so that the coin is, in the end, only worth around bullion value, which is around 40 Rand. It's often difficult to find these coins in graded form, simply because the value of the coin does not warrant the grading costs. However, in 2010, not one, not two, but 6 shillings from the Queen Elizabeth II era were sold for $126, or 962 Rand and 14 cents. That works out to 160 Rand per coin, not bad for the buyer. This 1959 sold in 2011 for only $20. Even though it's a MS63, that was 135 Rand at the time. The gem coins, they are a bit more expensive though. This MS66 1956 shilling is a good example of such a coin. It sold for $192 in 2019. It's nearly flawless. And then finally, the last coin of the Union Shillings. This 1960 graded MS66 and it sold in 2019 for $156 or 2,259 Rand. It's really a beautiful coin with some nice stoning as well. And that's all I have for you today. But before you go away, please just stay a bit longer. Thank you so much for watching. If there is anything you wish for me to cover, please let me know in the comments below. And also, if you would like a free evaluation on your coins, please send a clear photo of the reverse as well as the obverse of the coin. You can find my email address in the About section of this channel. I might just feature them in a future video. Anyway, keep well and happy collecting.